we've entered the age now of these large language models, and really these have a colossal, unrestricted, kind of untapped bank of data to train on. And this data was being acquired when most people and organizations were completely unaware that it was being collected and used for training AI. So looking in 2024 now, we're seeing AI models that have had access to almost everything that mankind has been created, at least publicly available areas. So there are predictions that most data collection refinements that we can make now will be exhausted in the next few years. So even if we can get additional data, we're pretty much exhausting all that accessible data in the next few years. So then you look at, I guess, a rise in the restrictions brought about by things like copyright infringement, lawsuits, legislative changes, all things that are kind of restricting the collection and use of data. I mean, you look at what are some of the big ones, like New York Times sort of suing, saying, look, you're generating a lot of content in our tone, and you're not paying for that, so you can't use our data.
Same with Adobe, I think, right? Adobe or any of the ones that are using art and imagery.
Exactly. It's almost like the best time was now for kind of collecting, because it was completely untapped. And now it's just more and more sort of restrictions and, stonewalling collection of data. So I guess the question is, where do we go from here? And the answer could be synthetic data. So what synthetic data is artificially generated data, and it mimics real-world data, but it's not directly obtained from real-world events or measurements. What we see is the potential lying in the fact that it can circumvent these copyright issues, and it can remove privacy issues, and also fill in the blanks from data sets that are not currently available. So you think there may be a lot of data sets that are private, that these sort of data scrapings or data collection processes can't actually obtain. These synthetic data sets can be created using two different scenarios or techniques. So the one is generative models, and they're models called GANs, G-A-N-S, or VAEs. So techniques like generative adversarial networks or variational autoencoders. And what these basically do is generate text that mimics the style, tone, and structure of any of the real-world content that they collect from. So basically, without directly copying any copyrighted content, you can get very similar data. It sounds the same, matches fairly well, but it's not infringing on that copyright. And obviously, that sort of synthetic data can be used to then train the large language models without violating any of these intellectual property laws.
You're mentioning earlier, like, we're exhausting what's currently just publicly accessible to just scrape from. Is it still scraping from something that humans have generated, or is it generating its own data, the models themselves?
So from my understanding, these generative adversarial networks and variational autoencoders are taking a lot of data now and almost relabeling it. So if there are privacy issues with the data, it can mimic the same sort of patterns, but it can generate unique. So if you have, let's say, a database
it's like
of
data laundering,
it is in a way. So imagine you had 500,000 contacts, and they have certain sort of demographic representation. So it may maintain things like that, but completely rename, generate a whole lot of content to still be able to train systems on, but it's not violating any of those. From my understanding, filling in some of the blanks through the second scenario, which is called simulated scenarios. So basically, organizations can create synthetic data sets by simulating real world scenarios. So something we'll look at is like customer service interactions. You may be able to actually simulate with the data, like we've seen with the generative models. You're able to sort of generate new content based on assumptions of what a user could be doing and what you've maybe seen in other data sets. So things like customer service interactions, medical consultations, legal discussions, those could all be private data that no one is willing to provide at the moment, but you can have these simulated scenarios that could say, well, if you had this court case and you did this and this, these could be the outcomes. Therefore, it could train it on what you want to do in those scenarios. Really what you can do is sort of tailor those data sets to specific use cases. So again, ensuring that no copyright sort of infringements take place.